Hello, everybody. This is our part 3 of our work from home series called How to Stay Sane When Working from Home. Today, we're joined by Teryn Grater. She is from a fantastic CPA firm in San Antonio, Texas, ATKG, and they're fantastic people to work with. Teryn and I met through a group called EO, and we've been able to spend some time talking about business and how her firm has been helping their clients with a bunch of different things right now, specifically the PPP program. So Teryn, great. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah. So I got some questions for you here. Let's kind of walk through them together. Tell me, from your perspective, we're a week and a half or so into processing of PPP paperwork that people have been able to work through. Tell me, is the PPP plan worth it? Is it something that all of your clients and you're encouraging all businesses to do right now? What's your take on it?
Well, definitely worth looking at for sure. And haven't had too many people decide not to apply for it after really looking at the details of it. So, excuse me. What's most attractive about this PPP loan versus some of the other loan options through SBA EIDL, and we can talk about any of that detail you want to, but the beauty of this one is that it's partially forgivable, depending upon your facts and your circumstances. So that's pretty attractive to have free money if you can get it. So especially anybody who has a lot of payroll and still has the payroll, didn't necessarily downsize or have to furlough people, it's really something you've got to look at and get it. Take a look. Up to 75% of it can be forgiven on payroll costs alone. So it's really worth looking at. I will say it's just as a week and a half into the process, it's a little like the wild, wild west right now, in that like every bank has different expectations and rules and what they want to see and understand the rules differently. So, I'll work with one client on one bank and they want this and their calculations look like this. Another bank will be completely have a different take on a couple of the items. So it's very, very variable. How fast they're processing them is very, very variable. I have some clients that have already been funded. I have some clients that haven't heard a word. They've submitted their information and has no idea where that is at this stage. So the banks are struggling to keep up with the volume that they received. And, there's a second round that started Friday for sole proprietorships and self-employed individuals. And really, there's still a very big lack of guidance on those applications. So a lot of the banks aren't even trying to process those yet, but, it'll take time. I think there'll be more rounds of funding. They're already starting to talk about funding more at the governmental level because I think they're going to run out of the first $350 billion. I don't think will be enough to fund everybody that applied. So it'll be a process. But I would, if you have not looked at it yet, you absolutely want to go look at it.
From I guess 2 questions here. So should every business apply? And is there any timing aspects that you're talking through with your customers about maybe when they should apply or when they should get funded? So would you just a blanket across the board tell every business to apply, or is there maybe some criteria you're using to evaluate?
Well, every business absolutely needs to be looking at the legislation that's come out in the last 2 to 3 weeks. This being one piece of it. So I do want to back up a little bit to say there are some interplays between some of the other provisions and some of the loans in some of the acts that may be more beneficial for you to do depending upon your employee base and your payroll base. So you really have to look, because some of the ones, if you apply for this loan, you are not eligible. Or if you get this loan, you are not eligible for these other things. Or if some of them, if you get loan forgiven, you are not eligible. But if you get a loan, it is still okay. So you really have to look at them all together. So I want to remind everybody, the first big act was the CARES Act, was the Family Leave Act. That one has some mandated sick pay that you are mandated to pay. So one, I do feel like business owners are kind of forgetting about those rules and really not looking at those hard enough yet. And they're just rushing to the loan options, whereas you really have a requirement if you have under 500 employees to pay some sick leave. So if you already don't have a healthy sick leave program, you have to pay some sick leave potentially based on your facts. So really look at that. Now, if you do pay some extra sick leave, there are some 100% refundable credits that you can get based upon those, and there's caps, and the rules are complicated, but you can get paid back by the government for those, but it's a different process, right?
Let me ask one question on that, because that's something that I'm maybe not familiar with. So this is if I'm if I'm having to send people home because they have the virus, or because they're caring for people that have the virus, or for some reason related to caring or dealing with the virus that they can't work. Me, the employer, I'm needing to pay them additional sick leave than what I would normally have inside their sick leave plan with our company.
Potentially, depending upon what your existing sick leave plan has. And it can be because the local government here mandated us to stay home. You know, it can not even be because somebody's sick. There is some provisions in there regarding if you have children who are out of school and need care, that you have to be home. So there's various criteria and various kind of levels, and there's various caps as to what you're required to pay. So it's going to be completely dependent on how robust your existing sick leave pay is and how impacted you are from an employee perspective on this. But that's a mandate, but then there's credits to help with, to pay for some of that, but there's a timing issue on some of that, right? You might have to pay the payroll now and get the credit at the end of the quarter or something like that. So just don't forget, it's not just the loans. You've got this sick pay mandate. Then you've got 2 different loan programs you can look at. The PPP loan, which is the one we talked about, that's if the part that's not forgiven is a lot shorter. It's a 2-year payback, but it's only 1% interest. So even if you have to pay it back, if you need funds to get through this tough time, it's still a pretty good thing to look at. There's something else called an EIDL loan that can be a longer term loan. Up to 30-year loan, but it's at a higher interest rate. I believe it's 4.75, 3.75, 2.75 for nonprofits. But that can be a longer term thing and can be used to pay other things. PPP can only specifically be used to pay payroll, utilities, and some mortgage payments for an 8-week period after you get the loan. Well, that's not true. It can be used to pay those things. The forgiveness part can only be used to pay those things for an 8-week period.
Right. So you've got this window that you have to document how you're spending those funds for that window in the name of getting them forgiven.
Correct. And I realize I just misspoke, so I want to clarify something. The loan itself can only be on payroll costs. And that cost does include, can include health care coverage and other kind of employee benefit thing. But the loan itself is on, most banks are taking your 2019 average monthly payroll cost, and then you get 2.5 months of it. That's the loan amount. The forgiveness amount, and there is, a lot of people are confused between how the loan is calculated versus how the forgiveness is calculated. The forgiveness then would include utilities and mortgage payments and those and healthcare costs for 8 weeks. So there's a mismatch on the 2.5 months versus 8 weeks.
And you kind of mentioned it just then, but maybe you can clarify. So I had read some things that were talking about 2019 as the average, and that's the sample, or a trailing 12 months. What are you seeing happening? What's actually happening?
I mean, the code actually says trailing 12 months, but most banks have gone, just because of documentation, that most of the banks have gone to just give me your 19 numbers. It really, again, like I said before, varies bank by bank on how they're handling. Most banks are at 2019 because they want to see your actual 941s and your payroll tax reports to kind of verify the numbers. So most banks are more comfortable with that because they can actually get data and reports.
So with a firm like ATKG, what are you putting together for your clients versus what do me, the business owner, what do I have to start to put together if I haven't already started gathering information? What kind of information am I going to need to do the submission?
It's really very, very simple. You really need that average payroll cost, but you just need to look carefully at the definition of the payroll cost. It includes state taxes, so state unemployment, but does not include federal FICA and Medicare tax. It does include health insurance and some other benefits. So you just need to look at that definition really carefully. For our clients, if they want us to actually try to calculate the numbers for them and we have the data, we're happy to do so. But some of the clients are absolutely doing it themselves and just having us look at it. So it's really not that complicated a calculation. The application is literally like 2 numbers on it, short of your information, and then a couple of certifications about have you had other loans that you haven't paid back? Some questions along those lines. But I mean, it's literally like you tell them the one number times 2.5, and that is the application. It's the smallest application I've ever seen for a loan.
Wow. So right now, I guess they're not asking for tons of paperwork because we're not worried about the forgiveness. We're worried about getting that number and getting the loan process. Is that kind of the understanding?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen them asking for is your quarterly 941s, maybe your W-2s, your W-3s, maybe your prior year tax return, and maybe if you haven't done that yet, your 2019 financial statement, just so they can kind of check that the numbers jive with the actual payroll reports. But for the most part, that's all I'm seeing them ask for today.
Okay. So without putting you on the spot or angering any banks or bankers that you know and love, who's moving fastest? What do you see happening out there with your clients, and what banks are moving fast? Some people maybe have an option to pick one bank over another. They might have some relationships they can use. Like for the business owner, what's their strategy? What's working, or what do you know right now?
A lot of the banks initially said they could only do this for their existing customers. It's been a lot of press, unfortunately, about Wells Fargo, low limits on this and what they were able to do. And then they had to shut down, and they're back up and they're accepting applications again. I will say Frost handled it magnificently. And I've heard that true in other Texas markets as well, Houston and Dallas. So I'll say Frost, I think probably was the smoothest that I've seen. But the banks are all really just doing their best. Broadway's been very helpful and processing as fast as they can. Some other banks have had bigger challenges with it, just getting through it and being able to understand what the government's wanting them to do. There's a little bit of uncertainty at the bank level as far as what's their risk versus what the government SBA risk is, and how to make sure they're covered. So some of them are still navigating that and asking for kind of more information than some of the others. So, and then there's a lot of ambiguity around if you're an owner of a business, there's certain tax rules about how you get paid. So if you're a partnership, you should be getting a guaranteed payment versus if you're an S Corp, you should be on a W-2. So as an owner, the IRS says, I'm a partnership, for instance, that I can't get a W-2. I have to get a guaranteed payment. Well, some banks are then considering that is not eligible to calculate the PPP, but some banks understand that concept that it's IRS regulated that way. And again, of course, all payroll is capped at $100,000 per person, but excluding benefits. But so some banks are letting owner salaries up to $100,000 be in there. Some banks are just refusing to do that and say you have to apply differently through the self-employed calculation. But then you're applying twice for one business, which is also not allowed. So they're still navigating for sure. Some banks, though, have said they have capacity to take non-existing clients. I've had Broadway say that to me, as well as Lone Star National Bank. So they've been good about helping some clients whose other banks were unable to process their applications, because not all banks are SBA certified either. So I've been at a bank that didn't. Isn't.
Go ahead.
No, so you might have been at a bank that isn't SBA certified, and they can't get it in a week.
Okay, that was kind of going to be my question, because we've heard some people talking about like big bank, small community bank, like who's going to be the one that's got the, I would say, horsepower to actually handle this kind of unprecedented, thing that they're dealing with. I mean, they kind of have to make it up as they go along, right?
They really, the banks have been unbelievable in trying to get something this large rolled out in a week or two notice. Never happened before in the history of the world. So I think they've all been incredible and just doing their absolute best. But there's just, as with a lot of things that come out of government, even with a lot more time, they're fuzzy and nebulous, and they're not black and white. And so, just know, I know everybody's doing their best, but as an owner, if you're not getting, the response, or you don't feel comfortable, keep shopping for sure.
Yeah. So that's a great next question here around, what do you expect for communications? Now that you've had some that have been out there and processed or have been submitted, a week and a half ago, what are you seeing as like the communication timeline? Like what happens next? I've applied, I submitted my paperwork. What do you see happening next? Kind of the high level timeline of what we see right now.
It varies greatly. I think some banks are still trying to get that first wave submitted to SBA and back, and clear questions that are coming back. I have had questions come back from SBA, either, just clarification of data, or maybe the EIN has a problem, or, that is going back and forth a bit. But it's different with every bank. So, some are able to be super, super communicative, and others are just so overwhelmed that they're struggling to be. So if you're not hearing back, I think feel free to reach out. Try to be as patient as you can, knowing, what they're going through. But I think it's reasonable to at least ask them what you can expect and what their experience so far has been. Like, how fast are they turning things around? So I think if you just ask clarifying questions so that you're not harassing them 3 times a day, when should we expect to hear? I think that's a fair question. And the banks I've asked of that have been able to say, and they may say, we don't know right now, but I think they're really doing the best they can. So keep asking them.
Good. So since it is unprecedented, since a lot of businesses are affected by this, either they've had revenue streams that are being affected, or maybe their productivity is being affected, having to work from home, or, I think every business is going to feel some kind of impact, around us having to work from home and this crisis. What are some things you're telling your clients when they start to talk to you about, hey, cost cutting, or, money, finance, saving, like planning tips, tricks? What's just some advice that you're giving people right now to help weather and deal with kind of this unprecedented problem that we're all kind of facing together?
Well, I would certainly encourage everybody to kind of reassess, and it's, whether that's employee, whether it's pay cuts, whether it's just other expenses that you haven't really thought about. Like for me, it was janitorial. When my 50-person office is closed, I really don't need my janitors coming in every day. But at the same time, I don't want them to be unemployed either. So called them and made some kind of part-way deal in the middle so I could still help them, but not completely be paying for nothing. So once I really looked at a whole bunch of that stuff, our marketing budget obviously kind of shifted. We're going to have a lot less travel and conferences and things this year. So how do I kind of then redeploy that in a way that is cost effective? So I started looking at other things, other things that don't make sense now. So absolutely time to reassess. The world has changed in the last 2-3 weeks completely. So you need to change too. We all know if you don't change, you die. A couple things I want to mention related to these acts that have passed, both the Families First, so they call it FFCRA Act was the first one, and then the CARES Act was the third one. The second one was the EIDL one, which was the Loan Act. There's other payroll tax things in there that you want to look at. And again, deciding what loan to apply for or what credits to take, you need to look at it comprehensively. But there's also, besides in the CARES Act, besides the PPP loan, there's also an employee retention credit that's available for if you're keeping all of your staff, but they're maybe not as productive and you have a drop in revenue. There's some credits that can be obtained there, and those are refundable, I believe. But again, there's interplay with those PPP loans, so you got to look at it carefully. And then there's also a delay of paying your employer share of payroll taxes that can happen through the end of the year, and then that only gets repaid 50% the end of next year and 50% the end of the year after that. So, that could be, if you have a lot of employees, that can be pretty hefty. But you're not eligible for that if you have any debt forgiven under the PPP loan. But if you just have a PPP loan, then you can apply for that. And again, the employee retention credit is just if you get a PPP loan, then you're not eligible for that. But if the PPPs don't make sense, maybe because you ended up having to lay off a lot of people and you're not going to really have the loan forgiveness because there is a retention requirement in that forgiveness calculation, then maybe these credits and depending upon your wage base and how much your employees are paid per person, you might be better off with some of these credits and deferrals anyway, because you might end up getting more back than you would have gotten forgiven under PPP. So just make sure you are looking at all of those things. So between the sick leave credits that you need to pay, employee retention credits that you might be eligible for, delay of payroll taxes that you might be eligible for. That's a 2.5-year potentially deferral of paying payroll taxes. That could really add up. There's lots of different things to look at just from this act standpoint. Other cost cutting is just relook at your whole business and where you need to be deploying funds right now and what can wait. and ask. I mean, ask your vendors if they can help out in any way. You never get if you don't ask. That's for
Right.
sure.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned with your janitorial, like in some way, everybody needs to look at this. We're kind of all in this together. Like this is a global problem, and so it's not isolated. And yeah, working with your vendors and seeing if they'll work with you, on all sides of the coin. I know those are some of the conversations that I've had with the people that we work with too on an ongoing kind of basis. Is how's this affecting you? What does our relationship look like right now? Because it, like you said, it's changed quite a bit. Well, great. I'm going to do one slide here about some work from home, and then I'll give you a chance to kind of give us some parting thoughts. One of the things we wanted to share with people in this series is some of the challenges about working from home and some of the things that are kind of happening. We talked about some different tools and technology. One that's out a lot in the news right now is Zoom and the dreaded Zoom bomb. And so one of the things that's happening is very industrious and creative hackers realized that lots of people are using Zoom, and historically Zoom only issued like a 9-digit number to represent your Zoom meeting. And so hackers wrote some software to quickly try to join Zoom meetings in an effort to Zoom bomb. And so there was some stuff in the news around school classrooms and other public meetings and company meetings that were getting Zoom bombed by uninvited guests. So some things you need to do to prevent the Zoom bomb. First, don't use your personal meeting ID for any kind of public meeting. So if you're going to publish a meeting to a lot of people, don't use your personal meeting ID for Zoom. Personal meeting IDs are much better used for one-on-one meetings that you can quickly have. Second, set a meeting password. So just like every other password policy you have, the complexity makes it harder for someone to guess the password. So what Zoom did is they created another tick box that you can check when you prepare a meeting. You can have your meeting ID that's 9-digit numbers or 9 digits, and then there's an additional alphanumeric password that's added to that meeting ID. That makes it nearly impossible for the bad guys to try to guess your meeting ID and join a meeting unnecessarily. So set that password on all of your new meetings that you create. Third, restrict the screen sharing just to the host. If you're in a situation where you're inviting the public into a Zoom meeting, a webinar, or something you're trying to get, restrict the sharing so that no one can start to share their screen instead of the presenter or the host. Fourth, set up the waiting room. So like this meeting, before it started, I was able as the host to allow people in the room or not allow people in the room. This keeps the uninvited from coming into your Zoom meeting. And then fifth, you can you can make the settings around audio to mute people as they join, and then restrict their ability to unmute themselves. Same thing. These are all for the more public meetings that you might be sharing a Zoom link for, where you want lots of people to join, but you want to maintain some control and not get Zoom bombed. It could be embarrassing, and it could be inappropriate, and you wouldn't want those sort of company information getting out there to just people lurking on your meeting without you knowing. So follow all those things around Zoom. And Teryn, thanks for joining us. I guess what parting thoughts do you have for some of those business owners out there that are still trying to navigate this time and dealing with PPP and some of these other programs?
You got this. You can do this. We're all in this together. Actually, that's a new nonprofit here in San Antonio raising money for. So if you have any spare funds and want to help them out, we're in this together, SBA.com. We can do this, help each other. Your CPAs are a great resource. If you need help navigating these things, give them a ring. Again, if it's going to be a challenge to pay for it, just talk to them about it, see if they can help you out. Again, they're not super, super complicated, though the navigating between all the different ones are, but use all the resources you have. There's a lot of people trying, there's a lot of good things coming out of this crazy situation, people helping people all over the place, but you got to ask, if you need help, ask. So people are here. Good luck. We got this.
Yeah, we'll get through it, right? Things will get back to more normal, and we'll all get through this. So, well, great. I appreciate you being with us today. Thanks for your time. Great information. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And thanks a lot, Teryn.
Hopefully. Talk to you soon. Bye.